Actually, I don't think he was the first. I think that Copernicus and Galileo and Kepler and some of the other great scientists were also men of faith.
Most ministers will say that God created the earth, but Thomas Condon, an Irish-born frontier missionary, would gaze at his creation and ask one question: how? For Condon, understanding the natural world was crucial to understanding the nature of God. It was faith that first led Thomas Condon to leave New York and travel halfway around the world to the Oregon Territory, with very little money and no possessions. In 1852, Thomas and Cornelia Condon arrived in Oregon after a 3-month ocean voyage around the tip of South America. For 8 years, the Condons moved around the Willamette Valley, setting up small churches throughout the region. But Condon would soon discover a very different calling.
Condon, I think wherever he went, carried that burning curiosity that had characterized his life before he ever came to the frontier.
The rugged Northwest landscape was a playground of natural wonders. The land told a story that Condon yearned to read.
His wanting people to actually use their minds to intellectually explore reality often put him at odds, I think, with people's conception of what religion should be, which should be a tight little boxes of answers.
He was never popular as a pastor, so he never stayed in one place too long. Up the Columbia River was the Dalles, a bustling Oregon Trail crossroads, and the gateway to the high deserts of eastern Oregon. In 1860, the local Congregational Church hired Condon as their new pastor. To Condon, the Dalles was an accepting community with wide open spaces to be explored. With a rock hammer in one hand and a rifle in the other, Condon set out with the local cavalry patrol in 1865 on the first scientific expedition into the fossil beds of the John Day Basin.
This little plaque was erected in 1954, firmly embedded in a piece of goose rock conglomerate that Thomas Condon used to collect seashells from. And 54 years after this plaque was put in here, finally, a large structure was built to commemorate Thomas Condon's work in the basin and to continue his legacy, pursuing research on the fossil organisms found around the area.
The Thomas Condon Paleontology Center was built on a remote stretch of desert highway 10 miles from the small town of Dayville, Oregon. Winding 2-lane highways provide access to this region that is still relatively isolated by 21st century standards.
One of the things that probably intrigued Thomas Condon a great deal is that this landscape contains mysteries.
I would envision this person coming into the frontier and recognizing that he's seeing things that very few people of European descent had ever witnessed before.
It's an interesting scenic landscape that one can just look at and marvel at how it came to be. The colors, the shapes, the fantastic valleys and canyons.
I still think about that anytime I drive across the high desert, and I drive over those landscapes and I imagine what it was like at the time that Condon and my ancestors were out there. My family homesteaded at Fossil and actually provided some of the specimens that ended up in Condon's collection.
The fossils Condon found in the John Day Basin formed a vast collection that now belongs to the University of Oregon. Edward Davis is the latest in a long line of collection caretakers.
The graptolites. This is a pocket compass, and it was Thomas Condon's. And what's really cool is it's inscribed on the back, Reverend Thomas Condon from O.C. Marsh.
Othniel Charles Marsh of Yale University was the most well-known paleontologist in the U.S. Marsh rarely worked in the field. Instead, he negotiated to acquire the best specimens for his museum in the East.
The professors at Yale asked him to send specimens, and he sent boxes and boxes of specimens on the condition that the scientists at Yale would classify them. Condon couldn't do that. He was self-trained.
There's even one very sad letter associated with one of the important horse specimens where Thomas Condon writes to Othniel Marsh, the big name in paleontology in those days, pleading for Marsh to return the specimen to him when he was done looking at it, and it's still there.
Professor Marsh at Yale died, so another professor asked Condon what to do with these fossils, and before a decision could be made, that professor also died, and Condon thought, well, I better get those fossils out of there before anybody else dies. So that he was extremely disappointed that they were never classified, that the nation didn't have this knowledge that it could have had.
So there's an example of a turtle fossil from John Day.
So he named this whole area that we're looking at Turtle Cove, largely because he found all these fossil turtles.
Also, that turtle is more than 23 million years old, and it still preserves a lot of information about the way the shell grows.
And that's one of the reasons he got the idea that a lot of this used to be big lake beds, was because of the turtles he found.
When he picked up a rock and he hit it with his hammer and cracked it open and found creatures from the ocean that covered eastern Oregon, and he looked at that, and it was like looking into a deep sacredness for him.
And he knew that he would go out and be the very first person to uncover an ancient creature of some sort that had never been seen before. These were beasts that were undescribed. In many cases, when he shipped them back east to Yale or the American Museum, the professors there were startled and just amazed that all these new kinds of mammals had been uncovered by this totally unknown minister in Oregon. So just standing right here in this little spot, you're looking at 15 million years of Earth history. And over 110 different species of mammals have been found just in this little cliff right here, scattered throughout time, scattered throughout the section. And Thomas Condon certainly collected some of these primitive animals, things like giant, we call them Terminator pigs. Imagine a peccary the size of a buffalo.
Dr. Fremd has continued the research that Condon started in the late 1860s. However, he is equipped with facilities and resources that a pioneer minister could have never imagined.
Thomas Condon would have been proud of this facility. So things like this, Thomas Condon certainly had available to him, you know, good old chisels, various kinds of dental picks, things of that kind. But he didn't have nice forensic microscopes like this to work with. Much less did he have available to him digital motion picture cameras that could record the actual process of preparation. It kind of looks easy when you look at the finished specimen. It must, you know, people think we just pick these things up off the ground. But these are actually entombed in really hard rock. If one wrong move is taken, or if one is too aggressive, the bone can shatter like dropping an ashtray or something. Thomas Condon had simple hand tools. For the most part, he pretty much took a hammer and a chisel and he would just pound things out and take them away with him.